Afternoon, everybody. We're going to, although there's some people out there still getting coffees and teas, we're going to start because timings are quite tight this afternoon. My name's Adrian Webb. I'm going to be chairing the next session, which is the exciting philosophical reflections session. We have four really great speakers. We've been arguing over the format of how to do it to allow questions. I think the best thing is we have 25 minutes each from each of the speakers, and then to have 20 minutes of questions to a panel where we can bring them all up together at the end of all that. So first speaker today is our host for the day, Christine Hauskeller. Just a quick round of applause, please.
Does this microphone work that I've put there? Yes, super good. Thank you. Good afternoon. I just make another housekeeping announcement that I've been observing this morning. Actually, it would be helpful for the people joining us online if everybody goes, and I'll try my best to do it myself, out of their presentation after they've presented, so that actually we are not just this lying little bit on the side of a large slide that is no longer up to date with the discussion, and we can actually see the people who are online ourselves. So we'll try to manage this better in the next half day and the next day. Thank you very much for being patient with us, online participants. So my talk is on the drama of integration. And just because it came up, it's the same. I've put the slide in here just now after it was mentioned, because I myself didn't actually couldn't be memorized from on top of my head where Luis Eduardo wrote this about the Shipibo and the songs of plants. So I just read this passage, two passages from Luis Eduardo's article. According to Gebert Sayer, the shaman ascends to higher realms where he listens to the melodies from the spirits and sings with them. Those songs have a visual manifestation that the women transmit in their art. The Shipibo believe their bodies are covered by invisible designs. Illness is the disruption of the patterns, and the songs of the shaman restore their order and beauty. Healing is thus an aesthetic endeavor. While doing fieldwork in Santa Rosa de Pirococha, a Shipibo settlement by the Ucayali River, I asked Don Basilio Gordon, a shaman, about the plants he used to heal his patients. He said that it is enough to know the songs of the plants to be able to cure. The plants, and with this he means the psychedelics, are needed only if you do not know their song. That is the actual quote. And I think it's an interesting quote, even though it only sort of tangentially relates to the talk I'm going to give. I wanted to put it up here for the start, because I think it's an interesting way of thinking about psychedelics in the context of the sounds and resonances that substances in nature can elicit in us. And when we are familiar with those resonances that the sounds and the plants in nature can elicit in us, we may not actually need to be high to see. It's an interesting proposition. I pass it on to Fernanda for later. So to my own talk. I'm a philosopher. I have been spending the last 25 years doing philosophy of contemporary life sciences as both a philosopher of science, of medicine, and of bioethics. And so my talk today is in a way about framing and the ways in which how we frame and how science frames the results it produces and the answers it seeks is really impactful on the politics and the ethics in which we relate to psychedelics. And I do think that is an important topic to consider when we think about integration. So imagine there is a person very ill with no treatment perspective and invited to try a new treatment that is in development and super promising. So we have a situation where we have what we might call hype. What happens then when people jump onto this sort of bandwagon of the hype science? At least what are the risks from a bioethics perspective? An example, we have studied this, or I have studied this, and many other colleagues in the last 20 years, is stem cell tourism. And Evgenia has a lot to tell us about ayahuasca tourism in just a similar vein, where we find very costly sham treatments that can, in some cases, cause serious harm. Mostly they don't, sometimes they do. So while psychedelics is not a new biotechnology, very different from stem cell research. There is sort of, and that is an important aspect for me. It's not a whilst, the sentence was begun wrong, no whilst. Psychedelics are not new biotechnologies. They actually are very established routine ways of using natural substances to alter the state of one's senses, of one's mind, or of one's consciousness. They have been very established in indigenous communities, in the rave culture, in subcultures of very different kinds, in the psychedelic religions. So there is a way in which psychedelics are not a par with, say, stem cell research as new biotechnologies because they are not new. And this is really important to consider. But what does this mean then for people who feel desperate about the way they feel and they are in the world? When we make them to expect that an exceptional experience, that one exceptional experience, or the two they might get in the course of that clinical trial, can cause this change that they are desperately seeking, that they might have been seeking for 10, 20 years, because we deal, and clinical research usually selects, very severely ill people. Yeah? It's not you and I, it's people who have a long history of suffering very often. So, and then they are promised this, oh yeah, it's just 10 sessions. So in terms of identity, when you have a cultivated disease identity as I'm depressed, I suffer from PTSD, I suffer from an eating disorder, I just can't get over the grief that I've been feeling ever since there was this accident. So we create for psychedelic therapy through the way in which the science is created and communicated what I call drama in this talk, okay? We create a high intensity climate where there is lots of pressure. And this drama is created by severe mental disorders that are chosen as the cases for study mostly, by the way in which the intervention is framed as this dramatic shift, the one thing that can actually turn around the way your head works. Sounds fantastic, or maybe very threatening, and that's exactly the problem. And then there is a paradox in this. We want that people change exactly in the way in which we want them to change on the measurements for a severe mental illness. But on the other hand, they should actually not change very much. We don't leave them the space to reconsider their life, the relationships are in, whether they want to live in a green environment. This is not what this is about. All of this needs to be caged in. So this is the topic of my talk. Psychedelic experiences can change people. An example for this and how this is currently reported in the clinical literature from psychologists who are becoming social scientists as we speak, all of them. So there's a lot of research where they go out and talk to actually healthy volunteers and go through all the other data, because the clinical research has become so thwarted and so obviously loaded with problems, and the answers may be found somewhere else. So one way of finding answers is being a good sociologist. And that might mean asking people with a lifetime experience of psychedelics, whether, for instance, they feel that their relationship to nature has changed over this course of 5, 10, 20 years using psychedelics, regardless in this case now for my argument as, of context. So they find there is a correlative association observed between amount of lifetime use of psychedelics and nature relatedness that previous studies have indicated. And if you read all this together, this is what you find. So psychedelic experiences can change you, but this is not the kind of change I've just been mentioning. This is not drama. This is something that is accumulated lifetime change, okay? That people experience as very meaningful. And the meaningness is you often seen to lie in the relationships of connectedness that are being created. There are at least 3 types of connect. What?
You need to go inside? Okay.
Okay. Okay. So there are at least 3 ways of thinking about connectedness or forms of connectedness under discussion. The cosmic or transpersonal connectedness, a transcendental, the metaphysical, the mystical. Then there is the social or interpersonal, that thing that really religious community and rave and party contexts or festival contexts thrive on. Yeah? Being actually connected with, having a shared experience space with other people. And then the nature connectedness of an example of which I just quoted, how it is currently reported. I need to go on this again. So what actually is integration? Integration is something, and it's been said before today, what we do all the time. Life happens, and we actually need to sometimes adapt, to rethink our priorities, to actually wonder whether that is what we wanted or whether we need to want something else from now on. The ways in which people die, people have children. Life is in many ways a roller coaster. You get a diagnosis for something you didn't expect, and it could totally derail your life. Yeah? Maybe because it leads it to an early end. Maybe because you actually need to fight for 1 year or 5 years to get through it. Yeah? Or in any case, you will be different afterwards. So life happens. So why do we need integration for psychedelic experiences? Are they so much worse than anything that life has to offer? When we had our little group earlier this morning, we actually found that all three of us had actual life experiences that we found far more impactful and transformative on our life than psychedelic experiences we may or may not have had. So psychedelic experiences are very dramatic, and that is why they need integration. So they are this big thing, as I said at the beginning, yeah? Big. And because the clinic needs to manage them to achieve the right outcome, because it knows what has to be at the end of it. That is interestingly not how we usually respond to dramatic life events. We actually don't know what is at the end of it. We may hope that we get out of a crisis and that we find a way of adapting ourselves to the new circumstances in which you have this baby crying every night from 11 to 5 in the morning, and you don't know where your head is and you're completely blown out. So we want change. And the clinic represents to us here that change is not normal, but change is very risky, very dramatic, and it needs very good counselors to actually help you through it so you can make it. And my point is that I actually think this is quite overblown. A lot of change is not like that, and I have serious doubts that the millions of people in the UK and the many, many more millions worldwide who have experience with psychedelics would call them not undramatic or uninfluential, but the most important thing that ever happened to them in their life. We have to make a big hoo-ha to create the woo, a certain kind of big woo that needs a fully qualified psychotherapist to deal with it. Now, every society has the science it deserves. Yeah? The values that dominate a society happen to, and not by chance, dominate the science it produces, because scientists are people, and the science they produce, even though science has its own ways of measuring what is high standard and high quality, it is related to the wider ways in which a society structures its thoughts. So in a society that is individualizing and alienating, as I've described in my philosophy and psychedelics chapter in the book, and I don't want to go into this much now, only a little, but the science in our society is a legitimizing organization where it wields huge power. It is really dominant, especially the natural science. Universities are just now cutting down social science and humanities departments and releasing staff. And yeah, the science is not what people like I do. The science is the proper science, that stuff that happens in laboratories and needs machines and patents and all that. And this is the science that psychedelic science is, some aspire it to be. So this, in the orders of capitalism, science as a legitimizing institution that actually writes its own rules of what counts and what doesn't count, is very powerful. And it is a step that is needed to create a certain knowledge that you can then patent and turn into mass-produced goods of any sort, whether that's solar panels, triple glazing windows, or psychotherapeutic therapies. So the science, our science, what we call science, classifies and typifies by giving people diagnoses, etc. It standardizes and equalizes, and it de-individualizes. In a way, you could also say it radically individualizes. That's an interesting paradox within this, that your disease is your mental illness, even if all of us in this room have been at times very desperate, if not depressed, about the state of the world. It's all each our own fault. It's not the world, it's me. Never forget. So I'm going back to now my favorite topic, doing a bit of trashing clinical trials and the framing. So, so the gold standard of evidence is the clinical trial. The clinical trial works on exactly those parameters as I've just mentioned. You define very clearly what is the thing you want to treat, what is the thing you use to treat it, what is it you measure to prove that your new treatment is better than the old, and then you press everything else so that it fits this particular pattern, and that you can say at the end, in comparison to the control group, 25%, 10%, 5%, minus 17% of the participants were improved on the following parameters of measuring their chronic PTSD, depression, whatever. So it's the making the same that actually allows the science to create the kinds of arguments it wants. In this sort of setting of clinical protocol standards, we define the patient inclusion criteria, what will be done, the fixed number and content of participant and doctor meetings, and that has come up several times already, so I won't say much more about this. This is really the problem with the research, that the standardization makes it impossible to give individualized care for people who need something different, whether that's a different design of room, whether that is a different smell in that room, whether that's a different music or a different therapist. There's no space, no space. The rules, the rules. And then a big one that is important for my following arguments is the questionnaires that are being used to standardize the data collection. Integration is not that you sit there, if you have, say, assume ideally you have 5 sessions of integration. It's not that you spend these 5 sessions freely sharing with a group of therapists and maybe other participants in the trial what your experience was and learning from their experience. No. A lot of this time is used filling in questionnaires, because this delivers the comparable outcome measurements that you can actually, again, quantify. We cannot, however, standardize people, not their conscious and not their unconscious minds, and not their psychedelic experiences either. So, psychedelics, mystical experience, and therapeutic efficacy. One of the things that I'm targeting in this talk, or the main thing maybe today, is this question that the mystical experience is a potential psychological mechanism to influence outcome in psychedelic therapy. Nice sentence. So the more mystical, as Paul already said, the more mystical the experience, the more likely we get exactly the kind of outcome we want. So how do we make it mystical? We all know this sounds wrong, but this is actually what is implied here. Yeah? So they analyze for association between mystical experience and symptom reduction, and that is what they found. And then they ask for more in-depth exploration into the nature of mystical experiences to know what they actually are, so that we can maximize the positive effects on treatment outcome that the mystical experience is supposed to have, and minimize concomitant anxiety. So in this paper, clearly, the experience, what they call a mystical experience, is the thing that drives the treatment success. And the question is, how can we say exactly how we engineer it so that we get out of it what we want? I call this bending the mind. So how much integration in the clinic is about ensuring the desired income through suggestion and manipulation. And that includes which questionnaires, what questionnaires are even there? What can we even use as questionnaire tools? Then people answer about their own experiences after having had an introduction that always presents already a framing for what they might expect from that experience. The set and setting are designed to fabricate intense mystical experience because they can cause change in the person, as we've just seen. And this is not self-guided change. This is not change over time. This is not change at your pace. This is change at the pace in which the clinical trial wants to evaluate its outcomes. And this, of course, then is growth and a way of being in the world that is desired only as long and as much as it is wanted within the clinical trial design when you do this in the context of the clinic. And that requires a lot of intervention. And now I have this thing that I'm going to talk about for a few minutes, the hero's journey. That's so interesting. So there is this new paper by Brower and colleagues. It's not actually published. It is under peer review. And here, this is a bit of peer review for it. It is a fantastic example of how dominant framing of the direction of the hero's journey is actually presenting the trip experience and the real world in a certain pattern. So they have done this big thing about getting all these reports from people, how they felt at all 30-minute slots of their psilocybin journeys. So this goes from 0 here to 360, and then that all blurs into 1 after 360, which is 6 hours. That's quite a lot for a mushroom, a little mushroom. So there is and then they have these feelings, and all the blue feelings are negative feelings, yeah? Anxiety, bodily, nausea, fear, panic, all these sort of sweating, etc., are the blue feelings. The red feelings are the good feelings. And the important thing I will dwell on for a little is that they actually decide that some of this is the come up and the other is the come down. So the direction of the Western journey, psychedelic and mystical, goes the path of the religious experience in a trance state, okay? So you might be apprehensive of facing God. You might not know whether he appears, you know? But once you get up there and you can see him and he speaks to you, and I'm sorry if this is painful to anyone, I don't want to be dismissive of actual religious trance, but the way in which the psychedelic experience here is framed according to this pattern, I find quite shocking, actually, and extremely manipulative. So we go higher up, and then we come down. Back to this real world with all its woes of the sober people, which is maybe not quite hell, but it's certainly not a high point either, okay? And the emotions of people seem to suggest that, well, do they? Look at this, do they? So here are our emotions, all the come-up feelings, nauseous, anxious, tense, restless, uncomfortable, energy-causing, rush, confusion, laughter, not sure why this is bad, perceptual distortions and blur, tingles, skin and sensations, ruminations, detachment, panic, social discomfort. You can read this. Numbness, sweating, yawning, aches, and weightlessness. Weightlessness, why is that bad? Well, and then the come down feelings are content, pleasant, good, soft, gentle, calm, peaceful, philosophical reflections. Why are those good? Oh, well. Insight, social enjoyment and repair, focus, clarity, flow, ecstatic, blissful, joy, amazed. Okay, well, you get the picture. I don't need to read through all of this. So this is what they found in this distribution over the course of the 360 minutes. And that's how they interpret it, the come up and the come down. And I'm finding this so strange. So come up is the first 90 minutes, anxiety, nervousness, excitement, nausea, laughter, breathing, cognitive confusion, distortions, detachment, discomfort, and withdrawal. And then the next 120 minutes plus, you have all these good things, content, joy, relief, happiness, enjoyment, repair, talkativeness. Lovely. But is this how it goes? So thank you for this curve you showed earlier, Paul. I was looking through all the online curves I could find, and I chose this one. Because if I understand this right, indigenous sort of journeys often begin with a dive under rather than a climb up. A dive, an encounter with the snakes in the underworld, often underwater. So coming back then is not a come down, it's a come up. And our world then is not that sad little place that doesn't actually keep the promise that would be ready for us if we only got there. It's actually the place where we can live joy and friendship and pleasure and smell and eat and enjoy. Yeah. So this is why I call this the morality and politics of choosing which bend you take. If you go this way, then where we are is at best line 0. Yeah? If you go this way, this might be line 0 or maybe better than 0, but it's definitely, sorry, I need to do this the other way around, this way. But it's definitely a big difference which frame we choose, what we communicate to people that are seeking help to make do with their ordinary life and every day, at home, with their families, with their friends, if they get out of their bedroom. Yeah. So what do we offer them when we use this curve or this curve rather than this curve? Yeah. I think there's something to be said for the hero not being the guy who climbs the mountain and then comes slowly back home, but taking a sort of Greek myth way of looking at it. The hero's journey is very ambivalent. It has really depths and some heights, but actually the safe place, the home for the Greek hero is here. So I take issue with the simplicity of the linear curve very generally. I don't like linear curves. That's a different topic. I don't go into this now. But if we accept that sometimes a linear curve can be helpful to illustrate something, that curve that we usually use in current psychedelic science is the wrong way around. And so there is an interesting paper. I'm nearly at the close of my talk. How much dominance over the narrative should we leave to these psychedelic scientists that actually use a particular form of shaping the curve that is very tied to a particular cultural narrative that in a way devalues the real social world we live in? So this article by Villiter and Traxel talks about the ways in which the ethical inquiry of psychedelic-assisted therapy looks at the ethical implications of the therapeutic mechanism proposed by the rebus hypothesis, and they argue that that similarly has exactly this problem that I've just pointed out in a different way. But there is this vulnerable patients that are given these therapeutic interventions and that are actually promised this sort of hero's journey, which might not be what one needs. Yeah? So in the medical setting, we restrict the sharing and use questionnaires to make the process of meaning making easy for the analyzers and difficult for the people who have to make meaning of their trips. The psychedelic assisted therapy wants radical change without radical change because it doesn't allow for space for actually radical change, which goes on a very different pattern of organizing one's emotions, experiences, and relationships. And then life alters a person in autochthonous ways over time, in exchange and learning with others. So the standards and the mind bending really restrict processes of growth that we think psychedelics can engender, and that all the people running these trials think psychedelics can engender. So how on earth can we make this work so that it works? Because at the moment, I think it's actually going in the wrong curve and it has a wrong bend. So we need at least one thing, and that is develop better framing, better metaphors, and thinking about what is realistically and achievable, and presenting the psychedelic therapy not as a big drama of this journey where you might have a hard landing coming back home after, but instead as a different kind of journey that might be the beginning of a much longer journey, and provide ways in which people can, if they want to have life changes that actually change their lives and make change sustainable over the long term, the desired change, even in severe mental suffering, in a self-guided way. So the ethical container is important. The clinical container prevents important effects of psychedelic experience. It doesn't allow to widen the horizon from our cultural obsessions with alienation through feeling connected. It doesn't allow the experience of being part of life as a flow and a process of evolution. It doesn't actually allow experiences of awe, beauty, and care, because you sit there in this chair with your headphones and your eye shades, and you don't feel, hear, or smell anything much. And then, at least not of your choosing. And then there is this, it doesn't allow really respect for nature and for indigenous and subcultural knowledges and people, because they're actually excluded of the knowledge-making process that is being pursued here, because the science doesn't think there's anything valuable to gain from millions of people who are actually out there having had psychedelic experiences in different contexts over extended periods of time, except for the few people who now go out actually and do something like the nature connectedness study I represented earlier. Thank you so much.